We do have, today we have a workshop on seed starting and seeds in general. I'm going to expand that just a slight bit to include starting plants in general. And some of them don't have to be started by seeds. They can be started by poking in a glass of water or putting them in the ground just a stalk. So all of that is really included in my workshop on seed starting. The rules of this session are, I like questions at any time, and as long as we can figure out the technical aspect of getting the questions to me, I'm very happy to answer them as we go along, so don't be afraid of that. I'll just introduce the whole thing by saying that today it would be a day, I'm going to be starting seeds anyway. It really is the right time of the year for a few seeds. One of the seeds that I probably would start today anyway are members of the onion family. What do you need for starting seeds? Well, you need a container such as this. And you need probably a little better than that. You need a container with a top on it and a bottom so that you can water without it leaking through on your window or wherever you are. And you also see here that I've got labels, because since I start maybe a dozen or more seeds of different kinds, even different varieties of the same thing, I want labels on there before I even put the seeds in the container, because most of my mistakes in that category are that I mixed up the variety. I can figure out it's an onion, but what kind of onion is it, or what kind of leek is it? So there we go. So labels are very important. In addition to the labels, you'll need water, of course, but I think we were talking a little before we started, never too much water. So what you want is a container that can be drained, so that it's not sitting in a pool of water. For the first week, you can let them sit in the bottom part. Say if there's water level is around there, then that's fine, because this particular container has a, you can take out, and of course this part has drainage, and you put it in there and it stops it from leaking on whatever surface you have. But be careful not to overwater them. Keep them moist on top while you're doing the seeds. And also, you want lots of humidity in the first week or so while germination. Germination is the first part, but growing is another. So another little trick is one of these little containers here. Just anything plastic or to put over them to keep them even more moist. So there's your basic system for seed starting that you can find in a lot of different places. So after you do the preparation, there's no seeds in here yet, by the way. This is just all preparation at the moment. What I do is I water the soil, which is, it's important to not put real dirt soil from the garden in here. What you want is starting mixture, which is, it's actually something that is not really close to soil. There's no worms, there's no bacteria in here. This is sterile soil because we prevent diseases that way. And it's called starting mixture in various gardening centers. I make my own sometimes from perlite and a few other things, but starting mixture is very good for it.
So you wouldn't recommend potting soil?
Potting soil is probably okay, but there's a difference. Mostly, if a potting soil is sterilized, I wouldn't worry about it. A lot of potting soil is not sterilized. So you have to look carefully at what you're buying. The potting soil has more big lumps in it. Some of the potting soil has lots of twigs and other things. And some of the small seeds just prefer that very fine mixture of what's known as starting mixture. So that's the difference. Not too much difference.
It's just looking at saving some money because I do have some potting soil.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that starting mixture is more expensive than potting soil.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different, potting soil is sort of a big variety of categories. Some of it is meant for outdoor big pots, and then you just dump it in because it's cheap. But other potting soil is for smaller plants, so that's the problem with that. So what do you need to start a seed? Well, first of all, you need a seed. So I'm going to plant leeks in this particular variety here. These are our leek thing. I'm going to go to a little demonstration here for a minute before I plant them. So I'm going to put my share screen on, and I can find the preview. And so we have a little illustration of what a seed looks like. This is not an onion seed. This is about 100 times bigger than an onion seed. This is a zucchini seed or a squash seed. I'm not sure what. And so those are very easy to handle, but we're not going to plant these today because you plant those in about May. They're a hot weather plant. And so going down the line, beans are planted in May. They're a big seed as well. Here we go is coriander seed, which is about the same size as you see on the screen. They're pretty big. You can handle them individually. They're the cilantro, and they grow in this kind of weather, so you can start those seeds. And because they don't sprout that easily, you can scatter them quite thickly for a while if you want. So I will just go to this particular slide here. Now, when you have a seed category, you want to look very closely at the, we'll go to this part here, and right on here. This is the most important part here. So this particular batch of seeds was purchased in 2019. And at that time, germination, that's what germination is, how they say it, is 88%, which means that if you plant 100 seeds, 88 will sprout. The lot is just for purposes of tracing back seeds. And so this year is 2 years later. And so I don't think these seeds will germinate nearly as much, but in the case of carrots, they will germinate, just probably only maybe 50% or even less. What do you do when only 50% germinate? Well, you just plant more of them and hope some of them come up. So that's one way of handling seeds, old seeds, as opposed to new seeds. For certain things like onions, I would always buy new seeds because their germination rate is not good sometimes the second and third year, but most seeds are good. So I'm going to go back to the screen a little here, and I'm actually going to take some seeds out of the leek container. And I'm going to, this is bandit leeks. I have to know what kind of leeks they are. And I'm just going to put a handful in, I'm going to stand up for this, handful in my hands like this. And I'm going to take them just a pinch like that. You can see that they're very small seeds. And I'm going to put them in this container. It's hard that you have 3 hands, but I'm going to put them about 15 or so in each of these 4 containers. That's a lot of seeds, but because onions do transplant very easily, you can do that with onions. So off screen, I'm going to put them on. Bend it. And so I've got my seeds in there. And there they are in the seed. You can't see them, but that's the seed containers that what I'm going to do now is the next step is the seeds are on top. I'm going to put an extremely small part of additional seed starting soil on that, just enough to lightly cover them. No more than just, the idea is if you have a big seed, you cover them with the same size of soil as you do the size of the seed. So a zucchini seed, which is fairly like that, you can cover with that much soil. But with an onion seed, just a tiny, tiny bit. So I'm going to do the second one there, cover the seed, and they're planted. What to do next? I'm going to sit down again. And what happens now is that this is probably not watered quite enough. I'm going to put water in the bottom of this container, not over top. Because if you put the water over top the container, it's going to spread the seeds around in a way that you don't necessarily want. So I'm going to let that fill up about one half the way up, just to really soak these seeds to begin with. Once that you can see that the whole mixture is very wet, then you can take these out of the container again, dump any excess water out, and put them back in. And then what you do is you can put the top on just to keep them nice and moist. But that's not the end of it, of course. What do you have next? You need heat and you need light. So depends on what you have for that. If you have a temperature of around 20 degrees Celsius, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and you have a nice sunny window, you have you have room for a small number of plants, and that's just perfect. If you don't have that, then you have to provide some heat, and if it's not hot enough. A lot of houses, I keep mine in the basement, so I have to provide extra heat in the basement. But I also have to provide light because I don't have enough window space to do all my seeds, so I have light. So we'll go back to the screen and show you some of the light sources. Now these are just these are bigger containers here. This is a container that holds 12 or 24, depending on the size of the seed containers I just showed you. This is a fluorescent light that I found in a gardening store. It's balanced for sunlight. It looks like sunlight when the plants see it anyway. And you plug this in and hang it over top of the seeds. Now, quite frankly, you don't have to go for special fluorescent. Any fluorescent light will do, as long as it's a bright blue light, or sort of not the daylight, but which are slightly warm, or red, but just a white light, or even LED lights. So either one of those, as long as there's a lot of it. How do you make a lot of light? Well, you put it close to the plants, and that involves some hanging them in different ways so that you get them close to the plant. Now this is more or less an illustration of how it works. This is a light that actually touches this plastic container. So the light is touching the container. You can hang it from something else if you want, plugged in here, and on the bottom, if you really want to go wild and do a lot of plants, you can do let's find it. Here we go. Here is the heating pad. So this is a garden variety heating pad that is meant for seed starting. Now, the seeds that you start in these little containers here, they need about, well, let's put it, I'll see if I can see the illustration right here. This helps a lot. There we go. So right on this, as well as any internet site, you'll see how long it takes for any seed to germinate. Now, these are usually ideal conditions. Sometimes seeds take even double that time to germinate, depending on how they are. But just as examples, I don't see onions on this list. I'll look it up on the internet if I didn't know, but an onion takes about, I would say, 8 to 10 days to germinate. And but This is with this particular heat pad because it's providing some bottom heat for the plant.
James,
Yes.
can you use a regular heating pad or do you have to use a specific gardening heating pad?
No, I have some old-fashioned heating pads. Here's the thing about the old-fashioned ones. If they're really old, they're good in the sense that really old ones don't have any safety mechanisms on them. So my old pads have low, medium, and high, just about the same size as this as well, and they're meant for people, not for seeds. The problem is that safety regulations don't allow people to use heating pads that don't have timers on them now. So the new heating pads usually go off in 2 hours. So that doesn't help your seeds. You want your heating pad on for maybe a week. So old heating pads that don't have timers, which I found in Sally Ann, for instance, is one place, work fine. But the new ones with timers are not ideal only because they turn off in 2 hours. So that's the difficulty. So that's the elements of seeds as far as what onion seeds and a lot of other seeds require is they need heat for a while. That is fairly reasonably warm heat, but that's not the end. That's just starting the seed. After starting the seed, and then we talk about a few other seeds as well, and I'm quite happy to answer questions about individual seeds. You have to change the heat because once the seeds germinate at a warm temperature, they actually do better inside for a while at a cooler temperature. So you can take that heating pad off once there's a full germination of the seed. So you don't need it. And a lot of, now I'll give you a few examples. Now, a lot of people start tomatoes from seed, and I do too. And tomatoes love this nice warm heating pad beneath them when they're germinating. And they germinate like crazy. There's never a problem with germinating tomato seeds. They're fine. They're an easy one to start in containers like I just showed you. And they'll, for a couple of weeks, they'll just grow like crazy. And the thing about tomatoes, as opposed to some other things, is in fact, they like transplanting. So you can transplant them from a small container to a bigger container, to even a bigger container over the course of 1 or 2 months. But if they're in too warm an environment, they get too big. And what you want is you want them to grow nice big leaves, but not a big stalk. And so it's one of the problems with growing tomatoes at home is you try to avoid the tomato plants getting long and skinny. You want big leaves and low to the ground because that shows that's the way they grow naturally for the first week for the first month or so. So keep the heat away from them once, and this is true of most seeds, once they germinate and have a leaf or two. Now, leaves come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but tomatoes and have to have a first 2 leaves on any tomato, or almost all plants, are not real leaves. They're the leaves that are there to help it germinate. Then you'll see a second set of leaves on tomatoes and a lot of other plants. And those leaves are the ones that are true leaves. And that's when the plant really starts growing. And that's when you want to cut the heat down a bit. But you don't want to cut the light down. You want as much light as you can give the plant with less heat. Now, let's not freeze them or anything like that, but just less heat.
What about a fan? Like, because I like to germinate tomatoes myself indoors. I think I've mentioned this to you earlier. And my sister and I run into the same problem with the huge stalk and then not enough leaves. So
Okay.
probably her guest room is a little warm. So what about a fan or anything like that?
If I don't see any problem with it. Certainly, one of the reasons that the stalks get too big is it's too cold, and there's not enough light. So my first suggestion is give it even more light, if you possibly can. The more light, the better. I'm talking about a lot of light. The
They're
equivalent
usually under those grow lights that you get
grow
from
lights,
Costco.
or if anything you can get, but get it close to the leaves. Get the lights as close to the leaves as you can. And the second thing is that your fan does something that nature does too. The fan is not as good as nature, but it bends the plants. And actually bending the plants makes them strong. So especially tomato plants or anything with a stalk, what I do is I have maybe 10 or 12 tomato plants in a little container, and I just brush my hand over them 2 or 3 times a day to bend them. That produces a natural reaction in the plant to make the stalk stronger. So it adds to the strength of them. Same with trees, for that matter. If you have a tree that is staked up when it's 2 or 3 years old, and you take the stakes off, quite often they bend too much. What you have to do is let them sway in the wind for a couple of years to make them stronger. So it's like throwing somebody in the water to make them swim. But the plant has to be let loose, or else get some strength with either wind or something like that. And I think a hand motion brushing the plants is better than the wind. But if you have a fan, I don't see it as a problem. So that's how I would plant onions. And in fact, I did plant my leeks the same way. Onions and leeks are practically the same. What vegetables are people in this group trying to plant? What's the plan? What kind of plants do you want?
Can I just ask the question of Susan here? Going back to those onions, what were those? Just a green onion variety?
Actually, I've used the wrong word. They're a member of the onion family, but they're leeks.
Oh, you planted leeks. Okay.
And leeks are very close to onions. There's hardly any difference.
Yeah. Okay. And so once those germinate and they get the little green things shooting up, and you've got 15 of them in that little container, then what do you do with them?
Well, this depends on what vegetables you're planting. With leeks and onions,
Yeah.
you actually do not transplant them for quite a while. I'm talking about 2 months.
Oh, really? You leave them in that little container?
No, you leave them in you don't take them out of you don't pull them out of the soil the way you would in some things, and you don't divide them. You keep them together.
Oh, okay.
But you can put them in a bigger container. You can just put a bigger container and just pull the whole root mass of all these 15 onions, plop it in the new container, put a little more soil around it, and let it go for another month or more. Because the problem with leeks and onions is, yes, they need starting early, but they can't be put outside in the garden or in or a container, for that matter, outdoors, too early. And there's only one reason that happens, and that is that your onions may go, and this is especially true of leeks and less so of onions, but it happens to both. If it gets too cold at night, these onions and these leeks will think they've gone through winter. And if they think they've gone through winter, they think they're in the second season, because they're all biennials.
Okay.
You know what happens when a biennial reaches its second year?
Nice.
It goes to seed.
Oh.
That's what a biennial means. It means the first year it grows, and the second year it goes to seed. So you want to prevent that by keeping these onions, leeks, and other members of that family reasonably warm until early May, really.
Okay. Thank you.
So,
And then you eventually do divide them
oh yes,
after May sometime.
well, yes, and you can take a chance, and I always take it. I always violate my own rules, of course. I put out some of them earlier, and hope that the window that the frost is. For instance, if it's just one cold night, they don't think they're in winter. But if it's 3 or 4 cold nights in a row, then that's what makes them think they're in winter again. So
Okay.
it's a matter of taking a chance, and you'll see a lot of people who grow, members of the onion family will say, well, just to be sure, I won't put them out too early.
Yeah. Well, Lauren said she was going to grow cilantro, green onions, and basil for now, because she really wants some fresh cooking ingredients.
Well, I really I agree with her that those are things I think are great. And so let's put the cilantro out right away. Now, cilantro you would plant so that, and the cilantro is hard to, it's not hard, but it takes about 12 days to germinate. So you have to be a little patient with it germinating. And because it doesn't germinate well, I would make, about 3 or 4 times as many put 3 or 4 times as many seeds in your container as you think you'll get. Cilantro seeds are usually very cheap, so that's not a problem. And then I would be very careful about transplanting them. I would just divide them gently and maybe put a clump of 3 or 4 together so that you don't take the roots out of the little soil that's left when you put them in a bigger container. And containers are very good for cilantro. In fact, my cilantro has grown all winter. The last frost in the last week was the first time that I've stopped eating cilantro. Cilantro is a cool weather plant, and once you've started the seed, the same as onions or tomatoes, once you've started with that warmth, you can actually start at a little lower temperature because it's a cool weather vegetable. Then they like cool temperatures, and they can be put outdoors in mid-March or early April, no problem at all. And so next is, what was the next one? There's onions, of course. So I've talked about onions. So same as leeks, same general principles. When you see them, they're hard to sprout as well. So I generally plant a lot more seeds than I think will come up. But tricky as well, same as cilantro. Now,
are
basil.
green onions any different than what you were talking about as far as leeks go? Like, would green onions require any different attention, or is it all the same?
Green onions and leeks are almost identical.
Okay, cool, thanks.
In the end, you'll see, and in fact, as far as it really getting very, very precise about it, leeks and garlic are close together. They're similar to onions, but because leeks and garlic both have flat leaves, a lot of the people who classify these vegetables and plants, they say, well, they're closer together than onions, which have round leaves. But that's about the only difference. Once you see them in the garden, you can tell a leek from an onion just by the shape of its leaf. Now, basil is wonderful, but we're 2 months ahead of ourselves there.
You can already buy that in the superstore.
Well,
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
As long as you grow them inside, you can have them all year, but don't put them outside.
So I could start indoors right now?
No, you can't. I would not advise Well,
Okay.
Okay, if you're going to eat them indoors, sure. You can
Okay.
start them. They grow pretty fast.
Right,
They grow in about a month to the point where you've got little leaves that are quite nice.
nice,
But if it's below 10 degrees Celsius, they die.
right,
They
of
are the
course.
truly hot weather vegetable we have. It's the most
Yeah,
tricky of herbs to grow in this kind of weather, except if you
Yeah.
do it if you do it indoors, no problem at all.
well, I actually live in an apartment, so I only have a small balcony and indoor space.
Yeah.
So that's why I thought those plants might be better than some of the other ones. But I have lots of natural light and I can get the heat.
Well,
pretty
then
high.
you might have
Yeah.
you might have a good spot for growing basil year round, as long as you don't put it out in the nighttime.
Thank you.
until- Well, and you can after about June, you can put it out in the nighttime. But
Good to know.
any time that the temperature goes below 10, then you have some dead basil on your heads.
Oh man.
Oh, Angela here said she wants to try and grow cherry tomatoes on her balcony.
Excellent idea. No problem with that. So I think in about 2 weeks is when you want to start your, if you start from seeds, you have to look again at the seed catalogs and the packages, but there's a lot of cherry tomatoes around. Some are specifically designed for containers, and tomatoes in general, the smaller varieties actually do very well in containers to begin with. No problem at all as long as you've got sun. And so the starting time for those would be about March the 1st, or between March 1st and March 15th, anytime in there. And if I want to do, let's say 3 plants, I'll plant about 6 or 8 seeds, and I'll plant them individually, again, in a container like this. This is a very good container for tomatoes as well. So I place the seeds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that. They're individually, don't clump them together. And then they will germinate in about 6 or 8 days with lots of heat. Same thing as before, lots of light. Take the heat off too much when actually they produce their 2nd or 3rd leaves. And you can transplant these into bigger containers, for instance, individually into a container like this. So 1 tomato plant would go into a container like this. Keep it indoors, keep the lots of light, keep it low like that, and you can transplant it again into a bigger container because they love it. Tomatoes love transplanting because when they grow out they fill up their roots to the container. So the 3rd time you can do it, and then I would put them out in the balcony in the biggest container you have. So they're a little different than a lot of vegetables because they love transplanting. They actually do better transplanting than even if you plant them in the seed in a direct.
And I've heard with
Great, thank
tomatoes,
you.
I've heard with tomatoes, James, that if you plant them low into the soil, all those little hairs on the stalk can turn themselves into roots.
Absolutely.
And
Correct.
so it's actually a good idea to put the stem low into the soil.
To a point. So here's, because over the years I've had tomato plants that grow fairly like that high, a little too stalky and a little too skinny. What you do is you lay them on their sides and plant the roots about 4 inches below the ground, but you make a trench and put the rest of the stalk in, not too deep. You keep the whole thing fairly shallow, but reasonably deep. And then you leave the leaves at the top free. So yes, you're planting the stalk, but you're planting it in the warm top part of the soil. So that really roots very fast. So yes, the answer is yes. That's my long answer. Short answer is yes.
So then the plant starts to grow upright.
Yes.
Yeah.
Never a problem of them going. They know which way is up. Never a problem with that. So, and so just to give you an example, I'll do another little, let me see if you can find, so here's similar, this is not a tomato, but this is a plant that does something similar. These are all from the stalk. And this is only after about, that's actually a sage plant that I started about a month ago. So they grow like crazy from the stalks, and tomatoes probably do just as much. And another one here. This is another plant that, this is only, believe it or not, that is, guess how much time that's been in the water? Any guesses?
3 days.
Well, you're close. It's about a week, about 7 days. Just amazing rooting. So a tomato will do something similar. So will a few other vegetables, like anything. If you see lots of hairs on the stalks, you probably have a good guess that it'll produce lots of roots. So that's maybe an illustration of something else you can do besides plant seeds, is that if you have certain plants that like herbs, like sage, quite a few other things, you can start them by, well, I guess the official word is cloning, but what it is you're putting them in water and or soil. And in this case, I had a panic attack about a week or so. This is rosemary.
Oh, yeah.
And so before the big frost came, because I saw it coming, I said, oh my gosh, if it gets -10 outside, then my rosemary is going to be in trouble.
Toast.
So I clipped off a lot of the green edges, because the green parts of rosemary root reasonably easily, and put them in soil. And I think they'll, now because they're not as reliable as some things, I actually did about 6 or 8 of them and hope 2 or 3 of them will actually catch root, because, and they usually do, never that much of a problem. So that's an example of propagation by the old-fashioned cloning method instead. And when you do cloning, of course, you have something that you don't have with seeds, and that is it's going to be exactly the same as the original.
Mhm.
So a fair number of plants are actually cloned commercially. Like, well, we can't grow them here, but bananas are all clones. Nobody's planted a banana with a seed in a couple of 100 years. And so with seeds, especially beans, you can have some variation over the years, which is a good and a bad thing. So anybody interested in beans?
I was just going to ask you, I want to plant some pole beans. Yeah.
Okay. Now with a bean, you can start them early, although a lot of people just put them in the ground, wait for late May or when the soil is warm. But I do start some early, but I start in big containers. I start them in this size container to begin with. And I don't start all my beans in this size container, but just enough to get me an early bunch of beans just to get going. And because they do not transplant easily at all. So as soon as they germinate and produce a few roots, I try and put them in the garden, because the germination is the hard part with beans. I'm going to tell you a story about beans now, because I love beans, and I like the idea that beans can be bred very easily. Now, I have a bean that's called a faucet pole bean. The history of this bean is that about 40 years ago, somebody from Eastern Europe moved into East Vancouver, and next door was a fairly well-known Canadian poet named Brian Fawcett. Now, Brian Fawcett got some beans from this woman from Eastern Europe. She said they were good beans, and he grew them for 30 years or so. And each year he grew them, like all beans, they actually adapt to the local environment. So these beans were bred for Vancouver because what happens with any kind of seed, beans included, is that they only germinate if they like the conditions. So if you plant 10 beans and 5 of them come up, then those 5 like Vancouver more than the 5 that didn't germinate. If you repeat that for 30 years, you've got some really Vancouver beans that like Vancouver's environment, which is wet, cool, and not the best for some things. So there we go. And then you can breed them for height and for taste as well. You only save the seeds of the beans you like. And this is the second part of the story, is that some things like beans are very easy to save because they don't cross-pollinate. And so if you grow one kind of beans and you grow another kind of beans that are 10 feet away, they won't mix up. They don't sleep with each other. So never a problem. You can keep these beans separate and they will grow again in a year. So Brian Fawcett, the poet, he's got a bean that's sold across Canada called Fawcett's green beans. I've grown them for another 10 years now. And so I think mine are even bred even better than his, because I've saved them for 10 years. So between him and me, 40 years of breeding in Vancouver. So that's the story of the bean.
James, you also told me that you were able to actually get an early harvest of tomato.
Yes.
Like in June, weren't you?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true.
How did you do that?
Well, you look on the package, and I quite often will buy tomatoes from West Coast Seeds. And my package says early season tomatoes. It says 75 to 80 days. Now that's early season, and it's not quite as early as some. So some go as little as 60 days. So let's count back now. What's 60 days from June 1st? It's actually, it's April, but I don't believe them. I've never been able to get tomatoes in 60 days or even 70 days. So I start mine around now. In about another week or so, I'll start my tomatoes, the early varieties. And because I believe in what I just told you about tomatoes, that is, they love transplanting, I transplant these tomatoes 3 or 4 times in bigger and bigger containers. And the ones that I can get in June 1st are actually called Sun Gold, which is a very nice variety of tomato. They germinate about 60, well, they produce in 65 days according to the seed catalog. And I put them out, and I have a greenhouse. So they are healthy until about May 1st, when the greenhouse gets not as good as really the outdoor environment, because the greenhouse doesn't have good soil. It just has pots. So and on May 1st, I put them outside, but I put plastic, they're called cloches. So they're plastic tubing covered with plastic over top the tomatoes. And at night, they're completely enclosed. In the daytime, if the sun is out, I'll give a lot of ventilation, raise up the plastic that's covering them. So generally with that kind of system, you can get tomatoes. If you start them in March 1st, you can get them by June 1st,
Nice.
which is what, 90 days? Even though the package says 60 days.
All right. Overestimate the amount of time it takes to get fruit.
So are there any questions about other varieties of vegetables?
I actually have a couple. I mean, we've talked a little bit, James, and you know that I like to actually try and grow trees and different things from seeds that I get from vegetables and fruit in stores. Now, how would you suggest I do this more successfully? Because I have a couple that are just kind of sitting there and not really doing a heck of a lot. When my avocado.
Yeah, you have to be specific. What kind of fruits and vegetables?
Okay, well, right now I'm trying to grow an avocado tree. I did successfully grow one a couple years ago, and well, they take a while to germinate, but this one, I think I planted it way back in November. It's still just kind of, it's not doing a heck of a lot. I did kind of look at it, and the pit itself is splitting, so it's doing something. It's just maybe I'm not giving it enough heat Or
Well, I don't know a lot about the avocado in the sense of I'm growing one too, as a matter of fact. But my method was a lot simpler. What I did is I found one in the garden that was growing last summer, and there's probably maybe 2 or 3 dozen avocado seeds in the garden, because I just they go past the compost stage. They stay pretty stable. So one of them did come up, but it was accidental, and I took it inside for the winter, and it seems to be doing all right. But I can say that they don't like transplanting.
no.
Like, it took a big hit when I tried to put as much soil around it as possible, but it did not like transplanting much. But the first thing you look about any plant is my friend Google. I look up avocado and say, where do you grow them, and where do they like to grow? And I'm sure you'll know that avocados like Mexico, and they like that climate. So I would just give it lots of heat and lots of light.
Well, it's under my grow light, and I thought it was warm enough in my room, but
Well,
I'll try
the other
and-
thing is that it's a seed that wasn't bred for for germinating. So you have to, maybe I would plant 4 or 5 of them and hope that one comes up.
I have like 3 of them, but
Okay.
yeah, that's how I like to do my seed planting. Is I actually get like fruit or vegetables from stores and try my hand at that. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, there's I'm certainly think you're going to take risks that way, because first of all, you have
It's
to be
experimental.
very careful about hybrids. So I haven't talked about hybrids yet. I grow hybrid tomatoes. Not much else that's hybrid, but tomatoes are better quite often with hybrids. But what happens is you can't save the seeds of a hybrid tomato.
How come?
Well, the reason is that a hybrid tomato is artificially mated with the male and female flowers by hand, like that almost.
Yeah.
And what happens is that the seeds, it produces seeds, and those seeds will then produce either one or the other of the 2 different kinds of seeds that were put together to begin with. But it will not produce a seed that is exactly the same as the original. So, for instance, with my hybrid tomatoes that I harvest in June, I'll get a little cherry tomato the next year, and I've tried it, but they're not nearly as good, and they're not nearly as sweet, because one half of that hybrid is sweet, and the other half is early. But you get one or the other, or it may be something different. Now, if you do this for any number of years, it's possible to breed something that is called open pollinated, where it actually does breed true. But usually the seed manufacturers don't worry about that. They want to sell more seeds. And hybrid seeds are a lot more expensive than open pollinated seeds for that reason. Not that I'm criticizing them. I think they do a very good job, and hybrids have their place. But the fact is that you can't save them the same way as you can other seeds. So when you see a package, quite often, and right here, you can't read it, but I'll put it up here. You'll see there's at the bottom of this little package of West Coast seeds, it says OP. You can't read it, but I'll take my word for it. OP means open pollinated. So if you do save a seed, what you do is you have to wait 2 years for leeks or for onions. And you will get seeds that are the same as the leeks that you planted, except that if you plant another kind of leek nearby, then you might not. So you have to have only one kind of leek nearby. And yes, open pollinated seeds you can use. And I save a lot of my seeds. I have maybe 30 or 40 different vegetables that I have my own seeds for. And for tomatoes are one, if they're open pollinated. And a tomatillo, which is similar to tomato, I've saved the same seeds for many years because they're harder to find in the seed catalog.
Can
So,
you talk a little bit more about green beans? Like what
yes.
varieties would you recommend? And
Well, there are probably too many. Well, there's certainly too many kinds of green beans around. So one of the things you want in a green bean is you want tenderness if you like the really green beans, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
I have now the easiest to grow of all is Scarlet Runner.
Oh yeah, I grew some of those last year. Mhm.
Okay, and they're good for Vancouver in the sense that they don't mind cooler temperatures. In fact, they're completely different bean, and they're not of the same biological family as other kinds of beans. So they grow in cool weather, but and they're tender when they're small, but when they get big, they're not tender.
Right.
So there's so many reasons to grow beans. That's one of them, is to get them early and get them for. Now the next bean is your ordinary. I would think it's a low bean, not a pole bean, but a regular ground bean,
Mhm.
and almost any variety, just green or yellow or any purple, or the three colors that are. And that's a personal opinion. And there's so many of them. I say try one that is going to do early on you get earlier beans if they're not pole beans.
Is that a bush bean?
A bush bean, yes.
Bush- Okay.
Some
Okay.
of the beans are a little bigger than bush, but it's just a matter of, there's a whole variety of sizes, but some of the pole beans are, I think for me, too high because they grow for 25 feet. And but that might be good sometimes, but
You can
we
grow
don't have a growing
beanstalk.
season. They have to reach up to the top before they start producing a lot of beans. So you're wasting some time
Right.
growing that high. So that's
True.
why I say bush beans are probably going to be earlier but you might have the same bean exactly in the bush bean as a pole bean, except
Oh,
same flavor, same look, everything, except one is bred to grow high.
okay, interesting.
But because I like to grow lots of vegetables, most of my beans are pole beans. I only grow 2 or 3 kinds in a given year. Grow a yellow bean because my wife likes yellow beans. I don't, but whatever. And I grow a green bean because I like them.
A friend of mine has grown for the last couple of years a bean called a Virginia blue pole
Yeah.
bean. And she says they're wonderful. So,
Well, blue beans are quite common, and they'll look blue when you put them in the pot of boiling water, but 2 minutes later, after they boil, they're all green again.
right. I just assumed they were always green. I don't know. I don't know why the blue name came in there.
Well, no, actually, they look, when you pick them, they're well, in fact, another of my favorite beans is called purple peacock, and it's a very purple bean, very deep purple. They grow fairly early in the year, and that's another reason I like them.
Yeah.
And we pick them, and they're purple, put them in the pot, and they turn bright green.
Okay.
True of most of them, because
Yeah.
genetically,
Sorry.
a lot of bean flowers are purple.
You're right. Yeah.
They turn, they just like that color.
And where's a good place to buy seeds? At West Coast, would you say, or should we have?
West Coast is a seed distributor, yes, but you can do it by catalog or at any of the garden stores. Almost all the Vancouver garden stores carry West Coast seeds.
Okay.
They're not the only variety. West Coast are a little more expensive than some other brands, but they're local. And
Right.
because they're local, they're really designed for our climate. And of course,
Yeah, they're out in Ladner, aren't they?
Yes, that's right.
I think so. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks. Is purple peacock a pole bean?
Yes.
That's a pole bean. Okay. Thanks. But I could just put those right in the ground, correct?
You would.
You said start some.
Okay, any bean likes, I think the safest thing is to put them in the ground when the temperature of the ground is above, let's say, 10 or 12 degrees. I mean, and it doesn't and it doesn't get cold at night anymore. And that's usually mid-May.
Mid-May.
have-
Oh,
We have a very, very difficult time of it in Vancouver because it's cold for so long before it really gets warm. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you have to wait. Now, what I do to trick that is I do tend to start a few beans, and as I say before, in pots like this
Yeah.
size, I would only put 2 beans in a pot this size,
okay.
and I would only keep them inside in warm environment for only about a week and a half or 2 weeks until the first leaves show.
Okay.
And then I would put them out in the garden early. Because the thing about beans, even peas, is that they will grow in cooler temperatures, but they will not germinate in colder temperatures. So the trick is to get them to germinate.
Right. Okay.
So that's the reason for the pots. For most beans, though, just putting them in the ground and waiting the right season is probably best.
Great. Thank you. That's all I'm going to grow this year.
Beans, well, it's a good choice. I'll do say that a lot of people all over the world grow beans as a really a staple crop. It's really a great food crop, but all over Latin America for centuries, in fact, for more than 1,000 years, three crops grow together very close together. One is beans, one is squash, and one is corn.
Okay.
Now, they're called the three sisters, and they grow together, actually very close together. Like you plant them in the same, you put a big pile of earth up, you plant a bean seed, or 3 or 4 bean seeds for a hill of beans, put a couple of squash seeds in the same pile, and you put some corn seeds in too. That's how the Mexicans, the Maya and the Aztecs survived for 1,000 years. That's what they ate. It's called the Three Sisters. They all grew them together in hot weather. So
okay.
if you like plants and you want to know how they grow, you always look at their history to see where did corn come from, where did squash come from, where did beans come from. Well, the fact is that all of those came from Latin America.
Right, yeah. Okay,
So
good.
that's only certain beans, like lima beans, fava beans, they come from Europe. They come from the Middle East, but they're a different kind of bean completely.
So when you're talking about a Mexican bean, are you talking about a green bean?
I'm talking about any of your standard pole beans, any kind of, all green beans in the end will turn to hard beans if you let them grow.
Because where do pulses fit in with beans? You want
to repeat that? I couldn't hear you.
What's a pulse? What are pulses?
Pulse is something like lentil. Pulses are a big family of they're a member of the bean family, but some of them are like lentils and other things. I'm not sure how many things are in a pulse family, but they're grown in the prairies and they really grow well in Manitoba and Saskatchewan.
But they're not a bean per se.
Well, they're in the same general family.
Oh, they are. Okay.
But not, so bean would be a relative of a lentil or whatever.
Oh.
Not a close relative.
Yeah. Enough about them.
They're all good to eat, though.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe I'll move on and have corn, squash, and beans together.
Well, it's actually, if you have lots of sun, it's a really good combination to try.
Yeah.
The corn is the hardest for Vancouver because Vancouver has its cool weather, and corn will grow well in Langley and White Rock, but not in downtown Vancouver. And I have a backyard part in Kitsilano, which is a little too cool sometimes for corn.
Yeah.
You guys are making me want to have chili tonight.
Chili?
With the beans and the corn. So I'm like, now I want some chili.
Well, I certainly think that's possible with even our Vancouver weather. You can grow chili peppers, which are really the same. It's the same family as tomatoes.
Mm.
So if you want to start peppers or chili peppers, you start it the same way as tomato plants.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Where do I put it? Okay. Well, that was great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So there's on my screen, and haven't really looked. There's a lot of questions there. So let's see. I'm looking now. Okay. Well, I just trying to go through the questions. Are any I've missed?
No, I think we're good. I do, before everyone goes though, I want to draw your attention to an announcement I put into the chat. I don't know if you guys read it, but each person registered today will receive their choice of seeds and kind of a seed starting kit, a windowsill greenhouse.
No.
Yes, you will. Shireen and I have been working on that for quite a few weeks with West Coast Seeds. So we have quite a few of them, and we'll be mailing them out, and she'll be delivering them personally to the people near her, but she'll be mailing out the rest. So hang tight for that email. There'll be a list of seeds available for you.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful.
It is
Oh,
a nice
you're-
surprise. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Yes.
So I think before I leave, I should recommend one other easy seed, and that's lettuce.
Okay.
It's very good in containers also. It's good in the garden, and it starts very easily in little pots before you transplant it. So you can start lettuce fairly early too, because it's another cool weather vegetable. This particular picture here is just, I'm growing this one in water, but you can grow it in dirt, and just an illustration of how lettuce grows so fast. But the roots will not grow much bigger than this. And that's why a thing like lettuce will do well in containers.
Wow.
James, where are the seeds in lettuce? Where, like, if I was to get it from like the store, I guess where would the seeds be? That I know that's a weird question.
Well, just seeds in general are either, so plants, most vegetables are either biennial, 2-year cycle, or 1 year. And so lettuce is in the former category. It produces seeds its first year. And in fact, the reason that a lot of people find lettuce hard is not because it doesn't grow, because it grows very well, but because it grows to seed fairly fast. So if you plant a seed of lettuce in May, you'll probably get 2 months of good lettuce, and then it will go to seed. But that's completely natural, because that's its natural life cycle. And like all vegetables, it will grow, it grows 6 inches off the ground as leaves, and then it'll shoot a huge stalk up that's 6 feet high. And it will produce all of its energy goes into producing seeds, and you'll see little flowers. They'll look a tiny bit like these flowers, but this is not a lettuce flower. This is chamomile, but they'll look a little bit like that, only much rougher. And those seeds, I will, once they are almost dry, I will cut off the big long seed stalk, put it in a paper bag, and shake it. And all the seeds will fall off, which they're naturally meant to fall off on the ground, but I let them fall off into a big paper bag instead and save them for the next year. And so lettuce is another thing that's very easy to plant and very easy to save the seeds.
James, could I ask another question? I'm really not much into growing vegetables. I like to garden, but I'd like to learn more about it. And I've noticed people when they grow lettuce, like especially like a romaine, they'll just keep taking the leaf off the stalk, and it keeps getting taller and taller. Like I would have thought you just cut the whole thing off and eat it, but that sort of that ends the lettuce then, doesn't it? So
That's right. That's right. Generally speaking, it will end the lettuce if you cut off the stalk, but the stalk is there to produce seeds. So I personally will pull off individual leaves, but I grow lots of lettuce.
And just leave the stalk and keep pulling the leaves off the stalk.
you can do it either way. It's not going to matter too much about the lettuce. It's going to end its life trying to make seeds. And
I
once it tries that, it's not going to be as good a lettuce.
But this type of lettuce that you're showing us here, is this a butter lettuce?
It's called rouge d'hiver, which is a French word for winter lettuce. So
Okay.
I grow it all year round.
And how would you eat that? Would you just pinch the
Take
leaves
the leaves,
off,
pinch the leaves off, yes.
and then it continues to grow from the stalk? The leaves?
Well, it won't have much of a stalk for the first month. Then it will gradually turn into it will have this urge to reproduce by making a seed stalk. Once
Okay,
that happens, you can continue to eat the leaves, but the leaves are not as good.
I
It's
see.
putting all its energy into the
The
seeds.
seeds. But if you pinch that seed stalk off, would it continue to grow leaves?
Yes,
I
but
see.
not as well.
I see. Oh, okay. All right, thanks. Interesting.
James,
Tim.
yes, can you hear me, James? I unmute myself. This is Sheena.
Yes.
I can't stay to the very end, but I just emailed to Michelle. I have another Zoom meeting that I have to attend to. So continue on with your, this is very informative. So that can grow in water. Is that right? I don't need to put it in soil.
Well, yes, put it in soil. I was only
Later.
doing that to show you where the roots are. I do grow some things in water, but it's pretty
Yes.
much technical. It needs nutrients. I guess you need instruments. It's hydroponic growing.
Yes,
it
and heat
requires-
and sunlight. Okay.
And it requires not only nutrients like fertilizer in very precise amounts, it also requires oxygen in the form of a bubbler, like a fish tank or something. So in fact, that lettuce was grown in a fish tank.
Oh, okay.
Oh, interesting. Yes. Okay. All
Good
right.
luck.
Well, have a great day, everybody. I have to leave now. Thank you.
All right, well, thank
What
you.
do I do now? I just press leave, Michelle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So I just have another Zoom meeting. So thank you, James. And then Michelle, you have my email address because I've just sent you my
Yes.
email chat.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. And
Bye, Miss-
I hope to start this so I can grow some great vegetables to eat. Thank
Nice.
you. Bye. I hope
All
this
right,
works.
bye.
Leave. How do I leave? Oh, leave.
So can anybody see a big chart I have in front of me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you might look for something like this on the internet as well.
Oh, okay.
It's a more precise version of what I've been trying to say. And that is that this is for any particular vegetable, there's an optimum temperature. And generally speaking, some, things like summer squash and let's say tomato and watermelon, they like warm temperatures. So you'll see here on the chart that they are up to 30 degrees Celsius. And the second column has the number of days it takes to germinate. So if you're trying seeds, be patient. It takes, 5 to 10 days on a lot of things. Well, that's a big difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
And even 14 days on some things. So be patient on it. And when you're starting, because it's not all that predictable. And part of it has to do with how fresh the seeds are. If they're old, they may take longer to germinate than if they're young seeds. So that's just that's particular chart, which you can look for on the internet as a chart on growing temperatures of various vegetables.
James, what's a good thing to do with your seeds in the off season? Would it be keep them in the freezer, or is
That's if you have a few seeds, yes, that's generally a good way to store them. Most seeds are fine in freezer. I would be cautious about squash seeds and a few things. They might not like it as much. Small seeds seem to like the freezer more. I don't do it myself. I save them in I have an unheated basement that's fairly dry, and I have generally sealed containers, little tiny containers. So I have probably 100 kinds of seeds in tiny little containers.
yeah?
And keeping them in the dark, I would certainly below around 10 to 15 degrees is ideal. So all of those are good. Dark and cool and dry.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure how long we're supposed to go. I wasn't quite sure of our time on this.
It's usually an hour, but I mean, if you have some more
1
things to
o'clock.
add and if people have questions, that's fine, but I want to respect your time as well.
So I'm quite happy to answer any more questions if there are questions. So
Any more questions, guys?
Susan here. If I have some seeds, how long would a seed be good for? How many years would you even consider trying to plant seeds?
well, that depends on the seed. What kind of seeds do you have?
Let's see. I had some beans, and I have some, what are they? Lettuce. I had some of those lettuce on the ribbon, you know, that you can just plant the ribbon in the ground.
All right. Well, I would be more cautious about the ones on a ribbon than regular seeds. So I just don't know about the ones on the ribbon. I would say beans would be probably still good at 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
But keep in mind that if you're gonna have last year's beans, you would plant and you would get an 80% germination. 2 years, you might get a 60% germination. 3 years, maybe 50% or 40%. So just plant more beans and hope some come up if they're 3 years old.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Same with lettuce. I would say lettuce will germinate fairly easily for years and years.
Okay. Lettuce, you wouldn't start early though, correct?
You can, yes, you can start lettuce early, yes,
Yes?
definitely. It transplants easily, it goes to containers easily, and it likes cool weather. So all of those things make it a good one to go.
Okay. Okay.
So if any more questions, I can.
It's been full of information. Thank you, James.
Really
You're very
great.
welcome. I enjoy it. I enjoy the whole business of growing food.
That's quite obvious. Yes, you clearly.
Oh.
So
You didn't tell us anything about you. Like, what is your past experience?
Well, I was a journalist and a photographer for a few years, and then I became a lawyer. And about 8 years ago, I retired. And so I have been growing. I had an acre of ground in Langley for about 15 or 20 years. I also rented a plot in Richmond to grow. I've always grown food. In other words, I'm not really interested in any kind of plants except food plants, because I'm a cook as well. I like to cook what I eat, or cook what I grow rather. So my garden produces most of what I eat in the way of vegetables year round. And it's not all that big a garden. It's a 33-foot wide lot, south facing, lots of sun.
And that's at your home, or is that
Yes.
on? Oh,
Home
that's
in Kitsilano.
right. Lovely.
And so I go to France around it, and there's a word in French, potager, and I like to think of my garden as a kitchen garden, which is really what it is. It's a garden that's meant to, you go out to the garden, and what you do is you look at the garden and say, well, what can I have for supper?
I like that.
Yeah,
That's why I'm going to grow beans this year.
yeah.
I don't have south facing, I have east facing, so it's really just luck of the draw for me what comes up. So
Well, I was so thrilled with those Scarlet Runners last year, but like you say, they get quite tough as they get bigger. And
Well, you can keep picking them. So keep picking them early, and they'll be better.
yeah.
So I'm going to say that this is the end of it. If there's no more questions.
Good. Thank you very much.